The farm had always been tucked away, hidden at the far edge of county land where fields stretched out endlessly, and the tree line formed a natural barrier between civilization and isolation. For years, the only way to reach it was a jagged, dirt-packed trail carved by tractors and worn down by seasons of rain and snow. The owner of the farm, practical, stubborn, and unwilling to wait for county resources, had grown tired of it. Every time the wheels of his truck sank into mud, every time delivery drivers refused to travel down the path, and every time he watched hay bales struggle to get hauled in during the stormy season, the frustration mounted. It wasn't laziness or vanity that drove the decision. It was necessity. A paved road meant survival, more reliable access, higher property value, and freedom from the whims of weather. With savings scraped together and a contractor willing to work off the books for less than the usual price, the transformation began. Weeks of grading, asphalt laying, and compacting followed until finally a crisp, clean stretch of blacktop extended from the county road straight to the farmhouse. Smooth, efficient, and wholly his. The owner admired it daily, watching sunlight shimmer against the surface in the morning and headlights trace its curves at night. Neighbors along the outer subdivision noticed too. For years, they had complained about their own gravel driveways and the HOA's refusal to fund major improvements. Now, there was a bold ribbon of asphalt cutting across what had once been forgotten land, and resentment was immediate. It started small. A car or two parked briefly on the shoulder of the new road as if testing whether it could be used. A neighbor jogged across it, waving half-heartedly in acknowledgement, pretending not to notice the territorial stiffness in the farm owner's posture. Then came the whispers. Someone muttered at the community board meeting that the road should be considered a shared amenity. Another pointed out that the farm technically abutted the HOA's territory, and roads in the general vicinity ought to remain consistent. At first, the farm owner brushed it off. After all, he had the invoices, the contracts, the bank transfers that proved every penny came from his pocket. But the HOA was not known for letting go of opportunities to expand its reach. Within weeks, letters appeared in his mailbox, folded neatly on HOA letterhead. The wording was sharp, but cloaked in professional courtesy. They claimed that the road was an unapproved improvement subject to review. They stated that it would need to meet community standards. They hinted that its existence on land connecting to their neighborhood gave them shared rights of management. The farm owner laughed bitterly, tossing the letters onto the kitchen counter. They could argue semantics all they wanted. The land was his, the road was his, and the HOA had no authority. But the tone of the letters grew bolder with each delivery. Soon they weren't merely requesting documentation, but demanding it. Then they declared that the road was now under evaluation for inclusion into the community's infrastructure. One morning, he awoke to the sound of heavy machinery outside. Rushing out, he saw contractors in neon vests and hard hats working along the mouth of the road. An iron gate was being installed, its posts driven deep into the soil. A keypad system was mounted to one side, wires snaking underground. At the entrance, an HOA board member stood supervising, clipboard in hand, barely acknowledging the farm owner's presence as if he were an intruder on his own property. The farm owner's stomach twisted with rage and disbelief. This was not just overreach, it was invasion. He had paved the road for independence, and now it was being claimed piece by piece. The gate wasn't merely a barrier, it was a declaration. The HOA intended to control access, dictate terms, and claim ownership without consent. What had started as a personal improvement had now become a battleground. The farm owner stood at the edge of his newly paved road, watching strangers sink metal posts into his ground, and realized that the fight ahead would not be easy. This wasn't just about asphalt anymore. It was about rights, boundaries, and the creeping influence of authority. The sun dipped lower as the gate's frame rose higher, the clang of steel echoing across the land. Neighbors drove past slowly, some smirking, others shaking their heads, but none intervening. The owner clenched his fists, staring at the intrusion, and swore silently that this was not the end. The road had been meant to grant freedom. Now it threatened to chain him to a battle far larger than he ever imagined, and this was only the beginning. The first night with the gate in place was unnerving. The farm owner sat on his porch in the dim glow of a single floodlight, watching headlights of unfamiliar cars stop at the keypad, punch in codes, and pass through. It was surreal. People who had no reason to step foot near his farm now had sanctioned access, as if the paved road had become a public street overnight. Every car that rolled over the asphalt felt like an intrusion, each tire grinding down the surface he had personally paid for. The next morning, the situation became clearer. A new email from the HOA landed in his inbox, written with bureaucratic precision. It declared the road officially annexed into the neighborhood traffic plan, as though the HOA's paperwork alone was enough to strip ownership from him. They justified the move with phrases like community connectivity, safety considerations, and uniform neighborhood planning. But buried beneath the polished language was the simple truth. They wanted control. At first, the farm owner considered storming into the next board meeting, evidence in hand, to set the record straight. He gathered every invoice from the paving contractor, pulled deeds and plat maps from the county office, and even highlighted property boundaries showing the road sat firmly within his land. But before he could act, the situation escalated. A package delivery that week was returned. The driver claimed he couldn't get through the gate without HOA clearance. Later, a friend tried visiting but was denied entry by the system. The keypad demanded a code that only the HOA controlled. It was no longer just a gate at the edge of his property. It was a lock on his life. As frustration turned to anger, he noticed something else. The HOA had installed signage near the gate, bold white letters declaring, "Private Community Road, access restricted to residents and approved guests." Below it, in smaller text, was a fine schedule for trespassing, loitering, and misuse of community property. Community property. The words echoed like a hammer blow. His road, the road he had bled savings into, was now being presented to the world as theirs. In the following days, subtle hostilities grew louder. A neighbor from the subdivision drove slowly past his fields, giving a pointed look, as if daring him to challenge the new order. Another left a passive-aggressive note in his mailbox, thanking him for finally doing something useful for the neighborhood. The arrogance stung almost as much as the gate itself. Determined not to be steamrolled, he called the county office to demand clarification. But the clerk, while sympathetic, offered little more than confusion. The county hadn't approved or overseen the gate installation at all. Legally, it shouldn't be there. Yet when pressed, the clerk sighed and admitted that county officials often looked the other way when HOAs extended their influence, so long as complaints didn't turn into lawsuits. And that was the problem, lawsuits. He could feel the weight of it already. Attorneys' fees, court filings, endless hearings. It would be a war of attrition, the HOA draining his resolve through bureaucratic delay while his daily life remained shackled behind their gate. But the farm owner wasn't ready to roll over. Not yet. He started documenting everything. The day the gate went up, the contractors' names, the vehicles that used the road without permission. He even took photos of the sign declaring his property as community-owned. Every piece of evidence went into a thickening binder. Still, the invasion cut deeper with each passing week. One morning, he awoke to find HOA landscapers trimming along the road's shoulder, cutting back brush as if it were their scheduled maintenance. They left behind neatly stacked piles of branches and even an invoice taped to his mailbox, charging him for a portion of the work. The absurdity was staggering. They had taken his road, blocked him from controlling access, and now billed him for services he never requested. Each new act blurred the line between incompetence and outright theft. Despite the suffocating weight of their tactics, the farm owner clung to one thought: ownership. The land was still legally his, no matter how the HOA pretended otherwise. And that truth meant leverage if he was willing to fight dirty. Late one evening, as he walked the length of the road with a flashlight, the binder of evidence under his arm, a plan began forming. He could see where the gateposts had been set, clearly within his property line. He could imagine the looks on the HOA board S faces if he presented ironclad proof not just of ownership, but of trespass. Trespass that could expose them legally, financially, and personally. The gate was meant to lock him out of his own life, but in reality, it might just be the wedge he needed to bring their entire scheme crashing down. The farm owner tightened his grip on the binder and stared at the steel gate glinting in the moonlight. The HOA had started a battle they weren't prepared to finish, and he was ready to escalate it. The days grew heavier with tension as autumn crept in. Each morning, the farm owner walked out to the gate, not to admire it, but to glare at the monument to stolen authority. What had once been a simple road leading to freedom now stood as a reminder of encroachment, a chain around his property that he had never agreed to wear. The binder of evidence grew thicker by the day. He documented license plates of cars that had no business being on his land, recorded timestamps of landscapers who claimed to be maintaining the stretch, and cataloged every HOA letter demanding fees. The language in those letters was growing more aggressive, dripping with condescension. One stated that since the road was now community-maintained infrastructure, the farm owner owed back dues for its upkeep. Another threatened liens if he refused to comply. But he knew the truth. None of it held water, not legally, not morally, and he wasn't going to let them bury him in intimidation. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields glowed with orange firelight, he spread maps and documents across his dining room table. The county plat maps showed property lines like veins across the landscape, and there it was in black and white, the road, sitting squarely within his parcel. The HOA's neighborhood ended a good 50 feet short of the gate. That distance was not a gray area, it was indisputable. The discovery hardened his resolve. He wasn't going to let them twist facts into authority. They had trespassed on his property, installed a structure without his consent, and stolen his access. That was not an overstep. It was theft. Yet the HOA operated with arrogance because they knew most people would bend before fighting. Few had the time or money to wage a war. But this was different. This wasn't a shared pool or a dispute over mailbox paint. This was his livelihood, his home, his independence. Still, the HOA was crafty. They knew the court of public opinion could be just as powerful as the court of law. Flyers began appearing around the subdivision, framing the road as a gift to the community. They described it as an amenity created by collective effort, a shared benefit meant to raise property values for everyone. The farm owner's name was never mentioned, but the implication was clear. His opposition would make him look selfish, greedy, and uncooperative. And it worked. Some neighbors drove past and waved as if thanking him for his donation. Others spoke loudly at the gate, saying how wonderful it was to finally have a paved road. The farm owner's silence was painted as hostility. The HOA board knew what they were doing. They were rewriting the story before his eyes, making it seem like the road had never been his to begin with. If enough people believed it, the truth wouldn't matter. The farm owner understood then that this battle wasn't just about property lines or invoices. It was about control of the narrative. If he let them continue, the lie would become reality. He needed to act before it calcified into accepted history. He started small. He contacted a surveyor, arranging for fresh stakes to be driven along his property lines, brightly colored markers hammered deep into the earth to remove any doubt. He requested official documentation stamped and signed, leaving no room for interpretation. When the surveyor's truck rolled up, neighbors slowed to watch, curiosity turning into suspicion as bright orange flags dotted the soil around the gate. The sight unsettled them. Whispers spread. The HOA sent another letter, this time feigning outrage at the unauthorized disturbance of community infrastructure. The irony was suffocating. They had built a gate without permission, and now they demanded he stop marking his own land. But the survey results were just the beginning. He filed a complaint with the county zoning office, attaching photos, maps, and the surveyor's report. His words were clear and measured. A private organization had illegally constructed a barrier on his property, obstructing access and claiming ownership of land that was not theirs. He demanded enforcement. It was a gamble. The county could ignore him, or worse, defer to the HOA's influence. But if they took his side, the HOA's carefully constructed facade would crumble. While he waited for a response, the HOA escalated. They installed cameras on the gate, motion sensors blinking red in the night. A new sign appeared. All traffic monitored. It was intimidation, plain and simple. The message was clear. Every move he made was being watched. Still, he refused to yield. He documented the cameras too, adding each photo to the binder. He knew the game they were playing, and he was ready to play it better. One evening, as he stood at the gate with flashlight in hand, watching the red sensors blink, he realized the battle lines had been drawn. On one side stood the HOA, bloated with power, eager to swallow anything within reach. On the other stood himself, one man with a binder of evidence and a stubborn will. But sometimes stubborn will was all that was needed. The gate creaked in the wind, steel bars rattling like a cage. He stared at it, jaw tight, and knew the fight was about to turn. The county's answer was coming soon, and once it arrived, the war would begin in earnest. The letter from the county arrived on a Tuesday, tucked neatly into his mailbox beneath the usual junk flyers and bills. Its envelope bore the county seal, the kind of official stamp that could tip a battle one way or the other. For a long moment, the farm owner just stood at the end of his driveway, staring at it in his hands. The air was crisp with the faint smell of cut hay, but his stomach churned as if something sour had settled there. When he finally tore it open, his eyes scanned quickly, hungry for vindication. The words were written in dry, bureaucratic language, but their meaning hit like a hammer. The county had confirmed the road was indeed on his property. The gate, the signs, even the landscaping done by the HOA, all of it was unauthorized construction on private land. It was the validation he needed, his binder of evidence, the survey markers, the hours spent documenting. It had all led to this moment. But the county's letter did not end with sympathy. Instead, it placed responsibility in his hands. If he wanted the gate removed, he would need to pursue it through a formal complaint process or civil court. The county would not intervene directly, citing limited enforcement resources. Relief and frustration tangled inside him. He had the truth, but no cavalry was coming. If the gate was to fall, he would have to topple it himself. Word spread quickly that the county had weighed in. Neighbors whispered at mailboxes, speculation buzzing about what would happen next. The HOA wasted no time spinning the narrative. In their next community newsletter, they framed the county's response as support for the neighborhood's efforts to improve infrastructure, a twisting of words so blatant it was almost laughable. They ignored the part about private property altogether, but behind the polished facade, cracks were forming. Not everyone in the subdivision was happy with how things were unfolding. Some homeowners had quietly approached the farm owner, voicing unease. They hadn't realized the gate was on his land. They hadn't signed off on the board spending association funds to install it. And now, whispers of mismanagement began weaving through the community like a spreading fire. The HOA board doubled down. They posted a notice at the gate itself, stating that any attempt to interfere with community property would result in fines and legal action. They thought threats would keep him at bay, but all it did was sharpen his resolve. The farm owner began preparing for the next step, legal escalation. He contacted attorneys, explained the situation, and dropped his binder of evidence on their desks. The attorneys were blunt. The HOA had overstepped badly, but it would be a fight. HOAs were notorious for dragging cases out, burning through opponents' patience and wallets. Still, the attorneys admitted, he had something rare, clear, undeniable documentation, and that could tip the scales. Meanwhile, the gate loomed larger with each passing day. Deliveries still failed to arrive, friends still struggled to visit, and the cameras perched on top blinked with a cold, watchful eye. The farm owner's own road had become a choke point, a scar of metal and arrogance across his land. But it was not just the inconvenience, it was the principle. Each time he walked past that gate, he felt the weight of the HOA's audacity pressing against his chest. They had assumed that ownership was negotiable, that persistence would outlast truth. They had mistaken him for someone who would yield. The farm owner began to notice subtle shifts in behavior. Some cars stopped less frequently at the gate. A few neighbors gave apologetic nods instead of smug stares. The illusion of community unity was starting to fracture. The HOA had overreached, and the first signs of backlash were beginning to ripple outward. Still, the board remained relentless. They sent another invoice, this time demanding a special assessment to cover the cost of gate maintenance and security. It arrived in the mail like a taunt, the numbers highlighted in bold as if daring him to pay for his own shackling. The farm owner laughed bitterly as he added it to the binder. Each page of evidence was not just proof for court, it was a story of theft, manipulation, and arrogance that would collapse under the weight of its own lies. But even as he prepared for legal battle, he considered other options. What if he simply cut the power to the gate? What if he ripped the posts out with his tractor, dragging them into the ditch? The thought of reclaiming his land by force gnawed at him in the dark hours of the night. But he knew the HOA was waiting for that mistake, eager to paint him as reckless, unstable, dangerous. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, he would bide his time. The board thought they had trapped him, but in reality, they had trapped themselves. The gate was the evidence, the symbol of their arrogance. And soon, it would become their downfall. As October winds rustled through the fields, the farm owner stood before the gate one more time, binder tucked under his arm, and allowed himself a grim smile. The county had confirmed what he already knew. The law was on his side. Now it was only a matter of patience, strategy, and endurance. The HOA had picked this fight, and he was ready to finish it. The first true sign of weakness came quietly, like a crack spreading through glass. A neighbor, one of the long-timers in the subdivision, slipped a folded envelope into the farm owner's mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in a shaky but deliberate script. The neighbor explained that he and several others had never voted on the gate installation, nor on the funds spent to maintain it. The decision had been pushed through by the HOA board without proper procedure. "If you take this to court," the note concluded, "know that some of us will back you. They don't speak for all of us." It was a small gesture, but a powerful one. For weeks, the farm owner had felt isolated, the villain of a story the HOA spun to the community. Now the narrative was beginning to splinter. Not everyone bought into the board's lies. Not everyone saw the road as a gift. Some were starting to realize it was a theft. But the HOA was not about to admit defeat. Instead, they grew louder. New letters arrived, stamped with bold red headers. Final notice, fees due. They accused the farm owner of refusing to comply with community obligations, citing bylaws he had never signed. They threatened liens, lawsuits, and even seizure of property. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh, except for the knowledge that HOAs had been known to follow through on such threats, dragging homeowners into endless legal entanglements. Still, the board underestimated one thing. The farm owner was not alone anymore. The whisper network among neighbors grew. A young couple down the road confided that they had seen the board members personally hiring the contractors for the gate, paying them from HOA funds without approval. Another neighbor revealed that the cameras installed at the gate were draining association reserves faster than anyone realized. Dissent was bubbling beneath the surface, and the farm owner could feel it. He continued building his arsenal, More photos, more documents, copies of notes from neighbors who opposed the board. The binder was no longer just a collection of evidence. It was a weapon. He envisioned it being slammed down on a courtroom table, each page tearing holes in the board's carefully crafted image. Yet while the tide of support grew, so did the HOA's desperation. They organized a community meeting at the clubhouse, framing it as a chance to discuss improvements. In reality, it was little more than a rally against him. Flyers were distributed portraying him as a non-compliant landowner whose obstruction threatened property values. The language was venomous, the accusations baseless, but the intent was clear: destroy his reputation before he could destroy their authority. The farm owner didn't attend the meeting. Instead, he stayed at the farm, lights dimmed, listening as cars streamed past toward the clubhouse. Later, whispers reached him that the meeting had turned ugly. Shouting matches broke out, with several homeowners demanding answers about the money spent on the gate. The board tried to quiet them, but cracks had widened into open dissent. By the end, the room had split into factions, with some defending the gate and others furious about being blindsided. The HOA's control was slipping, but the board still held the gate, and with it, power. One evening, the farm owner attempted to drive a truckload of supplies through. The keypad denied him entry, locking him out of his own property. Rage flared hot in his chest as he sat idling before the bars, the camera's red lights blinking down at him. He called the HOA's emergency line, demanding access, but the voice on the other end told him coldly that he would need to pay his outstanding fees before codes could be issued. It was blackmail, nothing more, nothing less. He backed the truck away, tires spitting gravel, and drove around through the fields to reach his land. But the humiliation burned deeper than any detour. This wasn't just inconvenience. It was a deliberate attempt to choke him, to force him into submission. That night, he sat at his table, staring at the binder, and realized something crucial. The HOA believed they had cornered him with their gate, but in reality, the gate was their greatest liability. Every time they enforced it, they deepened their crime. Every invoice, every denial of entry, every dollar of HOA funds siphoned into cameras and maintenance, it all added to the case against them. They thought the gate was a weapon. In truth, it was evidence. The farm owner drafted a letter, not to the HOA, but to every resident in the subdivision. He laid out the facts clearly and without venom. The road was on his land, paid for out of his pocket. The gate was installed illegally, and the HOA board had spent community funds without approval. He attached a copy of the county's letter and the surveyor's report. Then he delivered copies to every mailbox in the neighborhood. The response was electric. Some ignored it, still clinging to the board's narrative, but others began to talk, openly, loudly, and angrily. The HOA board had overreached, and now the community itself was beginning to question their legitimacy. The farm owner could feel momentum shifting. For the first time since the gate rose from the soil, he no longer felt like he was on the defensive. The HOA had started this war thinking they could smother him under bureaucracy and fear, but now it was they who were under siege. By truth, by evidence, and by their own neighbors. The gate still stood. The cameras still blinked. The signs still declared it community property. But all of it was starting to tremble under the weight of exposure. And soon something would have to break. By winter, the battle lines were unmistakable. The farm owner stood on one side, armed with his binder, and the quiet but growing support of neighbors. On the other side stood the HOA board, red-faced and desperate, clinging to the illusion of authority as their control crumbled. The road, once a symbol of independence, now resembled a battlefield, its asphalt scarred by the weight of the fight, its gate looming like the fortress wall of a petty tyrant. The letter campaign had rattled the board more than they cared to admit. In driveways and cul-de-sacs, neighbors were openly questioning how funds had been used. Angry voices rang out at the next HOA meeting, demanding receipts for the gate, demanding answers about bylaws ignored. The board deflected, stalled, and pointed fingers, but their polished facade had cracks running through it. The illusion of unity was gone. Meanwhile, the farm owner's case with the county and his attorneys pressed forward. Each new piece of evidence sharpened the knife. Photos of the survey stakes, invoices showing private payment, official documents proving the road was his, all of it stacked like bricks in a wall too high for the board to climb. His attorneys assured him the legal ground was firm, but the fight would take time. Time, however, was not on the board's side. The first resignation came suddenly. One of the HOA members quietly stepped down, citing personal reasons. But whispers around the subdivision told the truth. He didn't want to be dragged into a lawsuit. Then another resigned, leaving the board scrambling to maintain control. For the first time since the gate had gone up, the balance of power shifted visibly. And then came the final straw. A winter storm rolled in one night, dropping ice and snow in heavy sheets. Power lines sagged, the wind howled, and the gate, straining against the weight of ice, jammed shut. Cars backed up along the road as residents were trapped outside their own subdivision, forced to abandon vehicles and trudge through snowdrifts on foot. The farm owner watched from his porch as neighbors cursed and stumbled past, shivering in the freezing wind. The HOA's proud monument had become a prison for the very people it claimed to protect. In that moment, even the staunchest defenders of the board could not deny the truth. The gate wasn't safety. It wasn't improvement. It was arrogance made of steel, and now it was a hazard. By morning, anger erupted like wildfire. Residents demanded the gate be opened, repaired, or removed entirely. The board tried to save face, promising quick fixes, but their words rang hollow. Too many people had suffered from one night's failure. Too many had already lost patience with lies and power plays. The farm owner seized the moment. He distributed one final letter, this time attaching a copy of the legal complaint his attorneys had filed. The language was clear: trespass, obstruction, unlawful construction. The gate was not community property. It was an illegal barrier erected on private land, and its removal would be sought through the courts. The reaction was immediate. Neighbors who had once sneered at him now nodded in quiet solidarity. Some even thanked him for standing his ground. Others admitted they were furious at how the board had dragged them all into the mess. The tide had turned completely. Within weeks, the board collapsed under pressure. With 2 resignations already thinning their ranks, a recall vote was called. Attendance was higher than ever, residents crowding into the clubhouse with arms crossed and eyes burning with anger. The vote was swift and decisive. The remaining board members were ousted, their authority stripped, in the same way they had tried to strip the farm owner of his rights. A temporary committee was formed to stabilize the neighborhood, and their first act was to address the gate. When the issue came to the table, the farm owner stood quietly in the back, binder in hand, as the decision was announced. The vote was unanimous. The gate would be removed, costs reimbursed, and responsibility returned to the rightful owner of the land. Days later, heavy machinery rolled up once more, but this time it was not to steal. Crews cut through the steel posts, hauled away the keypad, and lifted the bars onto flatbeds. Piece by piece, the gate was dismantled, the cameras stripped, the signs torn down. The road stretched clean and free once more, exactly as the farm owner had intended. He watched in silence as the last of the gate disappeared down the county road. There was no cheering, no triumphant speech, just a quiet satisfaction, a heavy weight lifted. The fight had been long, bitter, and exhausting, but the principle had prevailed. His road was his again. The HOA, once bloated with arrogance, now limped forward under new management, chastened by scandal. Some neighbors avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their earlier complicity. Others offered small gestures of respect, a nod, a wave, an apology. It didn't matter. The farm owner didn't crave their approval. All he had ever wanted was what was his. Winter thawed slowly into spring. The fields greened, the sky brightened, and the road lay open beneath the sun. Deliveries came without hindrance, friends drove up without obstruction, and the farm breathed again. The gate had been meant to control him. In the end, it destroyed those who built it. And the farm owner knew one truth, carved into the asphalt like a scar. When you pave your own road, no one else has the right to claim it.